What's up, everybody, and welcome to the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Adam Finkelstein, and on this week's show, we are going to talk about the recruiting boards of college basketball's blue blood programs. Before we do that, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this with all the college basketball friends in your contact list. But here's the backdrop for this. This is a slower recruiting cycle than we are accustomed to. Only have one five-star prospect who's come off the board since the recruiting period came to an end. That is significantly slower than we typically see. So I'm bringing in my colleague, Travis Branham, do what he does and help us break down exactly who the best programs in college basketball are targeting. Trav, I want to start with Duke because I think Jon Scheyer has really solidified the Brotherhood brand as the preeminent brand in the world of recruiting, if you will. I thought his first recruiting class was huge as the head coach in waiting, but last year's class was huge as well, getting Cooper Flagg. I think this year's is huge again, because when you wear that championship belt on the recruiting trail, you got to prove it each and every year. And everybody wants to know what the Boozer twins are going to do. Where do things stand with that right now?
Yeah, obviously they are the top priority as of right now. And when it comes to looking at this board, they might actually be the first to make their decision, which is very helpful because if they do or don't get them, now it allows them to really kind of strategize moving forward because they have a very it's unique for Duke because usually they have one or two commitments already, if not three. And right now they have none, and they have a very wide cast net right now. So once we get the decision out of the Boozers, that the dominoes will really start to fall here. But it's not a guarantee they get them. In fact, Miami has been the long leader in this recruitment. Now, I do think things have really tightened up, and this is a three-man race with Miami, Florida, and Duke. And it's become a bit of a toss-up, in my opinion. But I'm not ready to classify Duke as a leader. I may still kind of tip my hat to Miami, but it's very, very close. But again, we should have a decision here soon. I do think that they are done taking visits. So once we get that answer, now we can really get a better feel for how the rest of this class is going to shake out.
Now, let me ask you this, whether they get the twins or not, and I'm going to talk specifically about the front court now. So whether or not they get Cam Boozer or not, we expect them to target at least one other front court player. Is that right?
Absolutely. They've made priorities out of several players here. So it's usually like when we're looking at these boards, it's like you have a top priority, and that's what we are saying with Cameron and Kane Boozer. But then you have like three additional priorities around them, talking about Koa Pete, Nick Kamania, and Nate Ament. These are three five-star caliber players that they have been recruiting Nate Ament and Koa Pete now for some time, and they are sneakily in this battle for Koa Pete. Whether they do or don't get Cameron Boozer, I think that is a player that they are probably attracted to taking both if they can. Both of those guys can play off of each other. Nate Ament, similarly, like you can play any three of those guys alongside Cameron Boozer with Caden running the point guard position. And at this point, I consider them in the fight with all three of those. Now, Nate Ament, his recruitment pretty much wide open at this point. He hasn't even cut his list. Every school has come calling and is wanting him. Nick Kamania has had one of the quietest recruitments we've seen out of any player in this recruiting in this class. He's only taken one official visit to Gonzaga going back to last fall. Now we do anticipate UCLA, Arizona, and Gonzaga being the schools that Duke is fighting against. And so I think they're going to be happy if they can get any combination, any one of those three to pair alongside the quote unquote idea of landing the Boozers.
But it sounds like the goal is two of the four, one way or the other. Is that right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. If you can get a combination of Cameron Boozer with Nick Kamania, Nate Ament, or Koa Pete, to me, I would be absolutely ecstatic if I'm Jon Scheyer. You get a tremendous amount of talent, skill, and versatility into your front court right there, and all are proven, highly productive players. And regarding Nate Ament, I mean, you still have a tremendous amount of upside to continue to develop and tap into.
All right, now let's talk about the backcourt. They recently had a Caden Lewis on campus. We know they're recruiting Shelton Henderson. Call him a guard, call him a wing, just call him a dude. That's what I call him. Braden Burries, they've been in there for a long time trying. In fact, there was some reclass talk going into this 2024 class that obviously didn't happen, but still trending with him in 2025. And then they were a little late in the Braylon Mullins sweepstakes, but they've since jumped in. Where do all those names shape up in the backcourt, and am I missing anyone?
I would say the only one you're missing there is Dwayne Aristotle, but I would put him and Shelton Henderson in a separate box. It appears that Duke is making a priority again out of both of them, as is the case with all of the guys on this board. Getting both on official visits, I would say they're in great shape in regards to Shelton Henderson, and they are in the driver's seat of that recruitment. But Dwayne Aristotle is a different type of player than Shelton Henderson. Shelton Henderson is just this versatile defender that is really long, athletic, that can also operate as a connector and playmaker out on the wing, is not a good shooter. That is the biggest area he has to improve, whereas Dwayne Aristotle is this just plug and play, 3-and-D, big-bodied wing. And so both give you a little bit of something different. And so, I mean, it could come down to how the rest of the class shakes out, if decisions have already been made, and does Duke need to bolster their perimeter with shooting? Then maybe you go the Dwayne Aristotle route. Maybe you need more just defensive versatility and athleticism, and then you go the Shelton Henderson route. I think that one could go either way. But then on the other side of the backcourt, just in regards to the guards, Caden Boozer aside, I think a lot of it's going to come down to timing. That's going to be the case not just with Duke, but also with Dan Hurley at UConn, Mark Pope at Kentucky, Bill Self at Kansas. Seems like these guys have made a couple of different players their priorities. And so I think some of these guys, it's going to just come down to a first come, first served basis. Whoever makes the decision and wants to come join your program, you take them and you're going to be happy either way, because this 2025 class has proven to be very, very deep from top to bottom. And so you're going to be getting an impact player in regards to any of these names that we're talking about here. With Caden Lewis, he's going to be a star college basketball player. Braden Burries going to be a star, but could only be there 1, maybe 2 years maximum. I mean, he's an absolute stud. And then Braylon Mullins, we've talked so much about him, just a knockdown shooter, going to be a highly impactful player wherever he goes. So as we talk about not just Duke, but North Carolina and the rest of these guys, I think some of these recruitments and the dominoes will start to fall with just first come, first served basis. And I would imagine if you're John Shire or anybody else, you're going to be very thrilled by getting any of these players.
You know, the thing too, we've talked in previous shows about the long list that a lot of these kids have. One of the things that the people watching at home are going to realize is we are going to say a lot of these names repeatedly. We're only talking about schools today, and you're going to hear a lot of the same names keep coming up. And to the point you just made, as soon as somebody commits, as soon as Duke lands a guard, as soon as whoever lands a player at a certain position, everybody else they were recruiting at that position is now no longer considering them because that school's out. So I think this perception of, hey, I'm recruiting 12 schools. I've got 12 schools on my list. I'm going to take 8 visits and then I'm going to choose from those 8 schools. No, you're not, because those 8 schools, many of them will have moved on by the time you're done with those visits. And I think that's the part that I just really hope these kids understand. All right, I want to move down Tobacco Road right now and talk about North Carolina. Here's my perception, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like this is somewhat consistent with what we've seen in the past, and that's that North Carolina is going to target a variety of the best prospects in high school basketball, and not necessarily at any specific position. If you look at their offer list, if you look at their board, they've done that again. I mean, it's a who's who of some of the best players in the country. But I look at it and I say, who are you trending with? Like, who does North Carolina lead with? So that's my first question to you. Like, if you had to handicap it today, who would you say is most likely to end up being a Tar Heel?
Yeah, right now I feel good about where they stand with Isaiah Dennis first and foremost. He's a top 40 recruit in the country, and he just picked up an offer from the Tar Heels, and he's a North Carolina native first and foremost. And so what I've been told is, like, when that offer came in, like, that can quickly change things for this recruitment. So if North Carolina, he's set now like five visits or so. Can't remember off the top of my head, but North Carolina was not one of those that he's already scheduled. So if I see that North Carolina visit scheduled, my ears will immediately perk, and that is one that I think that they would be able to bring home if they choose to go down that route. So I like where they stand with Isaiah Dennis. Next one is Derek Dixon. I think they're in good standing with him. A DMB guard that is just reliable, a big time shot maker, but can also play on the ball and make decisions. He's a good passer, just well rounded, high IQ, high floor guard. And then we can't forget to mention Jasper Johnson. He is going to be the next 5-star commitment that we believe will come off the board. And North Carolina, while I don't classify them as the leader right now, I classify Alabama. North Carolina is right there, and they can change this thing between now and decision day, which Jasper has yet to announce when he will, but we are anticipating that happening before the end of the month. So this one's coming down the pipe. If they do get him, now that's a really strong start to this North Carolina class, and then they can really start building around Jasper.
But we've only talked about guards so far, and this is a class that they were looking for that Armando Bacot replacement in the portal this year, and they didn't necessarily get him in terms of a prototypical big. They've got shooting, they've got a mismatch big, but what do we know about who they are targeting in the front court? And as much as who, like what? Is there a certain prototype? Are they trying to find, although this is a bad class to look for it, that true center in the middle, or what do we know about what they want up front?
Yeah, so they have offered Eric Reeby. He is the one that is trending across the entire country. Every blue blood, it seems at this point, wants him, and understandably so. However, Eric Reeby has yet to cut his list. He's yet to announce his official visits, although we are expecting that to be happening here fairly soon. And I do think that North Carolina will get a visit from Eric Reeby. So he's going to be a top priority. Alongside him is Nico Bundalo, top 25 recruit, 6'11", power forward that can stretch floor. He can just dribble, pass, and shoot. Native or has Serbian heritage, Serbian roots. And so he is another top priority. Now they've gotten guys like Koa Pete on an official visit, but don't really love where they stand with Koa as of right now. I think there's a list of schools well ahead of them. They also similarly brought Caleb Wilson on an official visit last year, and it seemed like they were in good standing. But throughout the course of summer, it seems like I don't know whether let's just say it seems like they've lost a lot of traction. And again, there's a long list of schools that we classify well ahead of them. They're trying to get in the mix with Nick Kamania. And as we just said, in regards to the Duke segment, it seems like there's a long list of schools ahead of them there. So they got a lot of work to do. Don't anticipate them being a huge threat with Nate Ament at this point. Now, obviously, that can change. You are North Carolina, but there's a lot to stick out and a lot of room to make up in regards to who they're going to fill this class out with. Because I mean, we don't really know where Eric Reeby stands in regards to who else he may be leaning towards. Like, it's just part of the nature of this entire 2025 class.
All right. Well, you mentioned Eric Reeby and Nate Ament, and I think that leads to a transition to talk about UConn, two-time defending national champions. Now, those are two of their priorities up front. My perception, though, is that this is a program that is really looking for a potential star guard. I think they're involved with a variety of top guards in the class. I should also say, when you look at their board, I think UConn's board is potentially smaller than anybody else. Danny Hurley has talked about this, how they're not going to they're going to be very selective, finding people that fit their culture, fit the way they play, from a scheme standpoint, from an intangible standpoint. And I think, we've seen their recruiting philosophy live up to that. They're not just recruiting all the top 10 players. They're being very strategic. So this is the way I view their backcourt. And then I want you to react to this. I look at guys like, I think it's Braylon Mullins, Braden Burries, Malik Thomas. I think any one of those guys has an opportunity to come in and really be on a fast track trajectory for the Huskies. I also think Darius Adams is in the mix, and I think Caden Lewis is in the mix as well. Those are the five guards, but I also think there's flexibility here. I think they're going to take two perimeter players, whether that's two guards or a guard and a wing. Where you've got guys like Tunde Yesafua, Hudson Greer, maybe Dwayne Aristode, maybe. Although those guys are more on the periphery. I think you're going to see UConn take two perimeter players, but the emphasis is on getting a really a guard who can be kind of the next in line of like that Jordan Hawkins type mold. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think you nailed it. It's definitely interesting just how uh, again, how I was saying earlier, like some of these schools have cast the wide net. Danny Hurley's sticking to his guns here. We'll be curious how the Nico Bundalo recruitment shapes out in terms of they're getting him on an official visit, but they're also going against schools like North Carolina, Michigan State, and Kentucky for that one. But I'm curious, like, who do you think they are in great standing with it heading into this official visit period, if you will?
In pretty good shape with both Braylon and Malik. I could see either one of them ending up being there. I don't think they will both end up there. That's just my suspicion. So I think that's another example of like timing, the timing of the official visits, the first one to commit, and then maybe it's not an option for the other one. I don't know that. I just, there's some redundancy there. And then when I look at the front court, I think that, they're probably going to take one guy, whether it's Eric, whether it's Nico, Nate Ament, or Tunde. Some of those guys obviously have flexibility. They could be perceived as a wing. They could be perceived as a forward. And I think that UConn has proven, they've taken a lot of those kind of combo forwards over the years and kind of developed them into more of true wings. So I think that could be something we see. So bottom line for UConn, I think they're going to take three high school guys. I think they're somewhat flexible. I think you can expect them to take one front court player, two perimeter players, whether that's two guards or a guard and a wing remains to be seen. But that's what I expect for the two-time defending national champions. Want to keep it moving here and then ask you about Bill Self and Kansas, because I look at this and I said this a couple weeks ago. With all this talk about UConn, I think Kansas, man, I think they could be like a juggernaut this year. They appear to me with Darius Acuff going to Arkansas, it appears to me that Kansas is in the driver's seat for Darren Peterson. Do you share that perception?
Yeah, as of right now, they are the perceived leader, and it's theirs to lose. And when Bill Self really sinks his teeth into a guy he wants, like very rarely is he going to miss. He's proven to be one of the top recruiters, especially in this NIL era. Kansas just continues to get stuff done out there. So you start with Darren Peterson, and they could, by the end of this kind of cycle, potentially have the number one class in the country.
So who else would you say they are in like very good shape for? Similar to the question I asked you in North Carolina, because I know they're recruiting Isaiah Dennis too, but is there anyone else in this class you say like, you know what, I think Kansas leads for this guy?
Yeah, it seems like they are in the driver's seat for Sebastian Williams Adams. He's a versatile forward that just kind of has that same that on court makeup of a typical Kansas guy. He's gritty. He plays with great energy. He's athletic. Not a great shooter. That's the one area he has to get better at. But he does everything else to impact winning out there. And ironically enough, something that I found very interesting in regards to Sebastian Williams Adams, his mother played at North Carolina, and it never really seemed like the Tar Heels really got involved with this one. And I think, again, I don't really have that known. Like maybe they try to mess with Sebastian and really never went anywhere. But just the fact that there's never really any, I don't recall ever getting seeing an offer reported or anything like that. Like to me, that was always interesting because kid's a winner, and so the fact that this one could go to Kansas could be a bit of a loss for the Tar Heels at the end of the day.
All right, so it seems like the rest of their board, and we've talked about Isaiah Dennis. It seems this is firmly in the mix for him. We've talked about Tunde. It seems like they've started to pick up some steam with him. We've talked about Eric Rebe. He's now expected to visit as well. A couple guys we haven't talked about yet: London Jemison, Bryson Tiller, John Clark, C.J. Ingram. These are all guys that we have seen Kansas linked to more and more since the July recruiting period. What's to make of that list of guys?
I mean, just similar to how the rest of this class is shaping out for everybody else. It's kind of a let's just see where the dominoes fall. We're going to have to sit here and wait until these official visits start to happen to really kind of get a great feel of how their leaderboards are starting to take shape. One guy that I'm just a huge fan of, and I think he fits Kansas, and that's CJ Ingram. Just a big time athlete, downhill scorer, big time defender who's continued to get better every time. Just one of those prototypes that Kansas had success with out on the wing, but I do think it's going to be extremely difficult to get him out of the state of Florida and get him away from the Florida Gators.
All right, now I want to ask you about this, and I should also mention Kansas is also linked with Malik Thomas, Braden Burries, Jalen Harrelson, Chris Senak, Nate Ament, Hudson Greer, Nick Kamania, and yes, of the 7 players I just mentioned, we've already talked about 6 of them, so you are seeing the redundancy on these lists and the importance of when these dominoes start to fall. They also made the final 7 for AJ DeBonsa. I don't know what to make of the AJ DeBonsa sweepstakes. It seems somewhat counterintuitive. He is a Nike NIL player. Kansas is obviously an Adidas school, which would seem to support the conclusion that maybe Darren Peterson, who has an Adidas NIL deal, ends up at Kansas. But it would seem to be, as I said, counterintuitive that AJ would end up there. Do you think there's any shot of that, though?
No, not really. And just to wrap up, not only this Kansas segment, but to go back to the North Carolina one, because I failed to mention them with that, because they were also on this list.
Right.
I mean, we've said it for a long time. This recruitment for AJ DeBonsa seems like it's going to end up in the hands of one of these quote unquote new bloods, and not go to a historical powerhouse in the blue blood. So the fact that he's a Nike kid through and through, it would be an absolute shock to see him end up at the premier Adidas college basketball program at Kansas. And just the fact, I mean, obviously North Carolina is Jordan brand. We do still say what?
It's BYU.
Honestly, you're stumping me there. I don't even know who they're branded by. But at the end of the day, it's going to be one of these new bloods that he's going to end up going to.
All right. Want to ask you about your home state school, and that's Kentucky. Obviously, everyone is looking to see what Pope is going to do with this first class. Again, it's a lot of names that we've already talked about. Let's start with Jasper Johnson. You have kind of said on last week's show that they were not all the way out, but maybe in 3rd place for the local Kentucky native. And then it's guys like Braylon Mullins, Caden Lewis, Nate Ament, Tunde, Eric Ribe, Malachi Marino, Chris Senek, everybody we've literally already talked about. So my question to you is, assuming that Jasper doesn't end up there, who should Kentucky fans feel best about at this point?
Malachi Marino. To me, they are very much in the driver's seat. This is their recruitment to lose. Another kid that grew up just 20, 30 minutes outside of Lexington in Georgetown, Kentucky. Older brother went to Eastern Kentucky. They have just strong ties to Central Kentucky. So Ohio State's going to get him on a visit. North Carolina's in the mix for him. But again, don't anticipate him not ending up in a Kentucky Wildcats uniform. But as of right now, that's about it. And that's not to say that they're in bad standing with everybody else. It's kind of in wait and see mode. I do think that they're going to have a good shot at Braylon Mullins. One of the main factors in Braylon Mullins' recruitment, it seems, is going to be the proximity to home. Now, he could go on this UConn visit. I believe that they're one of the first ones, especially distant. Yeah, so they're far from home. So, like, he could get on campus at UConn, and his eyes could be open, like, and really kind of shift his way of thinking and say, you know what, going far from home, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe this is for me. And then that really opens things up. But if he comes back from that visit, he's like, no, that's not doing that. Now you can start to see the dominoes fall. We don't anticipate him taking all these visits as it is. He's got North Carolina set up. He's got Tennessee set up. I think it's like a total of like 8 or 9 official visits now. But that could really play into the hands of Kentucky, just being a couple hours from his house and make this a real battle with Indiana for his talents. So other than that, Caden Lewis, blue blood battle. made him battle with just about every school in the country at this point. Eric Reeby, again, we've mentioned him. North Carolina, all the blue bloods on him on top of Ohio State and Creighton. And Chris Anak, I mean, that one just exploded. And I still think he's probably trying to get his bearings a little bit after what happened to him in June and July with just his absolute ascension in all the schools that can call him.
I will say this about Pope, because I know there was questions when he first got the job about like whether he was a brand in and of himself on par with that Kentucky job. I think the way he, introduced himself at that press conference answered it. I think this guy has got like a lot of charisma about him too. Like when you watch him on the road, he is front and center, standing up. He's got all the old tricks. You know what I mean? He sits in the right spot on the baseline or right at center court. He's always standing up at halftime. Like this is a guy who is presenting like he's the head coach at Kentucky with all the charisma that goes along with it. And I really do believe as long as NIL is up to where it needs to be, that he's going to have the cachet to pull in a couple of guys. But can't talk about Kentucky without ending this with a conversation about their former head coach. That's John Calipari now at Arkansas. We said there's only been one 5-star prospect to come off the board since the end of the recruiting period. That was Darius Acuff, who committed to John Calipari in Arkansas right here on the 24/7 Sports Channel. The best lead guard in the class and just kind of the perfect fit for Cal, regardless of if it's Memphis, Kentucky, or now Arkansas. Who else do we think is a possibility to join Acuff at Arkansas, though?
Malik Thomas, battle with UConn. Can't ever rule that one out. He fits kind of the prototypical mold of guards that Cal's had in past with that scoring mindset. I mean, he's not the athlete of them, but looking at Malik Monk, to me, just that guy that can just fill it up. And he did so at such a high level in high school basketball. He may not be the best defender, may not be the best passer. And again, athletically, they don't compare, but just from a bucket getting standpoint, I mean, they're two of the most fun scores that we've seen come through high school in that time frame. So they're going to be in the battle for him. Then Caleb Wilson, they are the one that has been trending the most with Caleb Wilson. They are the leader. It's theirs to kind of lose at this point. There is some other schools like Tennessee, Auburn, Georgia Tech that are all also involved here. He cut his list to 12, but as we've talked about, doesn't mean all 12 schools are recruiting him. But Arkansas has made him a top priority since they were at Kentucky. So would anticipate him potentially being a Razorback to join with Darius Acuff. Then they're in the mix with Chris Anak and Malachi Moreno, but again, don't really anticipate Malachi not ending up at Kentucky.
And I'm going to leave this open-ended. Just remember, there's a little bit of Tyron Stokes reclassification talk that would certainly add a big down to all of this. Trav, as always, thank you for joining and for sharing your expertise. You can find much more of Travis's work at 247sports.com, and you can check us out every week here on the 24/7 Sports channel for the 24/7 Sports College Basketball Show. Until next week, thanks very much for watching.